afternoon. My name is Mashida Tyler. I'm the acting executive director of the New York State Council of Churches. Through the wonders of technology, I will be projecting my voice as loud as possible, trying to speak to the rafters. With our mic check, the mics weren't working, so we're going to make it our best so that folks online can hear us, and folks here won't get too annoyed with the level of volume we're projecting. So I want to say welcome to the New York State Council of Churches Ecumenical and Interfaith Advocacy Days. This is the welcome, the opening. We're going to be doing a lot of our advocacy tomorrow. We go down to the Capitol, and as God would have it, we actually had our days originally scheduled for the 23rd and the 24th of February. But today, our snow days, it's beautiful outside. We have 65-degree weather today and 70-degree weather tomorrow.
All right.
So exactly, it is a beautiful day for justice. So I want to say again, welcome to the New York State Council of Churches. We were established in 1893 as a ecumenical social justice organization, bringing together all faiths for the collective benefit to fight for justice, for those who are marginalized, those who are in communities who are unheard. And we welcome you, those who want to learn more about what is happening in New York State and also nationally, and how we can make a difference in our communities and in our congregations. I want to say today's welcome and today's address I thought was very important to build on. We ordinarily do a welcome and a reception, but the way that the council is changing and adjusting, we want to build and to grow. And so we also are holding a training on what to do if ICE comes to your church, because so many of our congregations are facing this issue in communities across New York State who are seeing and experiencing ICE raids. And we need to know how to protect our neighbors and our congregation. So we are joined and happy to be joined by Reverend Amaury, Tanon, Santos. Yes. All right, amen, I got that. Who will be doing a keynote address for us in just a moment. And also Diego, okay, from Albany Law School. And the Columbia County Sanctuary Movement, who will be here in just a moment for the training on what to do when ICE comes to your church. And so with that, I'm going to say welcome. A few other notes is if you need to use restroom, there's a restroom right out to the right. And then if you go out this door, also you go out to the right, there's a restroom located there. After we're finished here, we're going to go downstairs and have some refreshments. And that's going to be in the chapel and the Wells room. So with that, I'm going to welcome one of our board members who comes all the way from St. Lawrence County, the Reverend Charles Chuck Smith, who is also the chair of the council's chaplaincy certification committee. And the chaplains do amazing... Commission.
That's right. Commission on chaplaincy.
Commission.
Yeah.
And they do such an amazing job throughout New York State, working with people who are incarcerated and ensuring that they have access to spiritual care. So with that, I'm going to welcome Reverend Smith, who is going to lead us in an opening prayer.
I'd like to share a brief statement that I found on the internet that somebody had on their Facebook page, a friend of mine. It says, "A broken Christianity searches every headline and every war for signs of Jesus' return, but refuses to see him where he said he would be, among the poor, the sick, the homeless, the immigrant, the bombed, the starving, the marginalized, and the oppressed. For Jesus said, 'Truly, I tell you, whatever you did not do to one of the least of these, you did not do for me.'" Lord Jesus, we come to you in prayer and a deep desire to draw this world to you. as you reside with the poor, the sick, the homeless, the migrants, the bombed, the starving, the marginalized, and the oppressed. May we draw the world to you so as to facilitate your kingdom. Lord Jesus, you proclaimed a kingdom where the captives would be released, those in bondage would be released, those who have not will be brought to a level playing field with all of humanity. Lord Jesus, I pray that we can be your arms and instruments for the facilitating of your kingdom as we lobby our state government. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Chuck. And if you get a chance throughout Advocacy Day to meet up with Chuck and you want to speak about chaplaincy, and also Reverend Jim Ketchum here, who is the staff coordinator for the Chaplaincy Commission, that would be wonderful. If you have any questions about those, either Chuck or Jim, your people to see.
New flyers.
Yes, and new pamphlets and flyers, which are in each of your pamphlets, are available as well. So, without much ado, I want to welcome someone who I have heard many good things about, and his reputation has preceded him since my first year coming to the council. Reverend Amaury, Tanon Santos, actually was one of the leader of the SICM, or Schenectady County community pantries that helped with emergency feeding programs and also helped to coordinate much of the emergency response when asylum seekers were brought to Schenectady County, northern counties, and left there with no supports. And so his organization coordinated with many other organizations to provide supports for the families, working with organizations such as the Capital Region, Sanctuary Movement, and that was really a space where the faith community became activated. And when I first started hearing all of this wonderful thing, I said, we have to have Reverend Tanon Santos to come in to speak to us. And now he is the current senior pastor at the Saratoga County Presbyterian and United Church of Christ in Saratoga Springs, New York. And so without much ado, welcome our keynote speaker, Reverend Amaury Tanon Santos. Oh, sure.
I apologize to the local church for me pulling stuff out without asking.
No, you're good, you're
But
good.
I want to make sure that y'all can hear me. You will know that I have no issue projecting it.
Yeah, I did.
So here we go.
I did that.
First, I am glad that I am the supporting act for Diego Alcala, who's a professor at the law school here in Albany. If you've ever heard Diego and his work around immigration, you will know it's going to be a good time to learn. If you haven't, brace yourselves. If you thought you knew stuff, you are going to realize the many things that we didn't, because things just keep getting complicated. But my role is to, again, support the act around what we're going to do with some thoughts about why we do what we do. Let me begin with a simple truth, or something that I hope we can affirm as a simple truth. And that is that migration is rarely a casual decision. People leave their homes because something has gone wrong, because violence has made life unsafe, because political instability has taken away hope, because economic hardship has made it impossible to provide for your children and your family, because environmental disasters have reshaped entire communities, because persecution has made remaining where they are from no longer possible. Not a many families, migration is not simply about opportunity. It's often more about survival. And when people arrive seeking safety, the question before every community becomes very clear. How will we respond? Will we respond with fear, or will we respond with hospitality? For people of faith, these questions are not new. Our traditions have been asking and answering these questions for centuries. And that is why gatherings like this one matter. Because tomorrow, many of you will walk into legislative offices and speak about policies that affect the criminal legal reform system, economic fairness, environmental stewardship, housing access and affordability, and the welcoming of immigrants in our communities. The agenda of Ecumenical Advocacy Days is long. The policy document alone spans 12 pages, which is in your folders. And I suspect that many of us at some point have looked at the scope of this work and thought to ourselves, this is a lot. But the work before us is not only political work, it is moral work. And perhaps more importantly, it is ethical mandate. And my prayer for all of us gathered here is that we approach it with passion, speak with clarity and courage, and trust that the Spirit of God is present whenever we act and on behalf of one another, and especially on behalf of those whose stories are not always heard in the halls of the New York State Legislature and the Executive Chamber. Tomorrow, many of you will have that opportunity to bring up those stories. Before I continue, I want to thank Rashida Tyler for inviting me to share some reflections this afternoon about immigration, faith, and public life as a way of encouraging the advocacy you will be undertaking tomorrow. And I want to acknowledge the leadership of Director Tyler. She has taken on responsibility of guiding the Council of Churches during what has been both a busy and demanding season for faith communities engaged in public witness. Leading people of faith in the public square is never simple, it's never easy, and in these days it carries particular weight. So before we continue, I invite you all to join me in showing appreciation and offering a collective prayer. And our collective prayer for wisdom, strength, and courage as she continues to lead us in this work. For this afternoon's reproduction, my hope is that we actually are not hearing anything new. Because what we are doing here is remembering something we already know, that our traditions of faith calls us to be, and what those traditions call us to do in the world. So I want to share some thoughts on the topic, welcoming the stranger, faith, solidarity, and community. When immigration is discussed in public life, we often hear the language of politics and policy. Borders, enforcement, systems, applications, budgets. While those conversations matter to communities of faith, immigration is not a political issue, it's a moral question and an ethical mandate. Who is our neighbor? What does dignity look like in practice? What kind of community are we called to build together? Across religious traditions, we hear the shared moral and even theological teaching. The stranger must not be rejected. The vulnerable must not be abandoned. Human dignity must be protected. This afternoon, I want to reflect briefly on three movements. First, the ethical teachings that encourage our work. Second, the human reality of migration right here in the capital region. And third, the responsibility we share to encourage laws that reflect our values of welcome, solidarity, and community. In Jewish scripture, the command to welcome the stranger appears again and again. From the book of Exodus, You shall not wrong or oppress a resident alien, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. And in Leviticus, that command becomes more clear. Quote, the stranger who resides with you shall be to you as a citizen among you. You shall love the stranger as yourself. Why is this command repeated so often? Because the people of Israel are constantly reminded of their own story. They were once strangers. Their ancestors migrated, wandered, and sought refuge. One of the earliest confessions of the faith in Hebrew scriptures begin with a striking phrase. A wandering Aramean was my ancestor. Migration is not outside the story of faith. Migration is part of the story of faith. In Christian scriptures, Jesus echoes and deepens this teaching from the Gospel of Matthew. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. And then Jesus explains later, just as you did it to one of these, the least of these, you did it to me. For Christians, welcoming strangers is not optional. This moral vision is not limited to Christianity or Judaism. Across the world's religious traditions, we hear similar teachings. In Islam, the Quran encourages believers to care for neighbors, for travelers, and to those in need. In Surah 4, verse 46. In the Hindu tradition, we hear a powerful phrase, the guest is like God. Depending how you translate it, it could also say, the guest is God. In Sikhism, the practice of langar, that shared meal open to all, embodies the belief that every person deserves welcome and dignity. In Buddhism, compassion calls believers to the relief of suffering wherever it appears, including the suffering of displacement. Different traditions, different languages, different histories, yet a shared moral teaching and ethical mandate. The stranger must be treated with dignity, and faith communities should stand at the forefront of welcoming immigrants. As a pastor, I have learned that immigration is never just an abstract debate. It is always about families. It is always about children. It is always about people trying to live with dignity. When the immigration debate happens in public life, human stories can disappear behind statistics. But immigration is rarely, like I said earlier, a casual choice. Violence, political instability, economic hardship, environmental crisis, persecution all drive people to make the hard decision to move. For families, migration is not about opportunity, it's about survival. And the question remains, how will people of faith and communities respond? Let me share a story that happened here in the Capital Region. In July of 2023, Schenectady County received around 80 families, 230 individuals, give or take, who were temporarily housed at a motel in Rotterdam. Among them were about 100 children, 70 of which were supposed to be getting ready to enroll in the local public school. They came from Venezuela, from Haiti, from China, and from Peru. Different languages, different cultures, and an entirely unfamiliar space and place. And what happened next tells an important story. Teachers prepared classrooms weeks from school start. Neighbors organized clothing drives, collected supplies, and distributed them among those families. Community organizations stepped forward to help families navigate healthcare, transportation, food access, and the language barrier. It is worth noting that the private contractor hired by the City of New York with an over $400 million contract in public funds
to work with this and thousands other of asylum seekers that were displaced throughout the state often struggled to provide some consistent support. And that's just putting it mildly. But neighbors did not struggle, nor did they miss a step. The community came forward, and what began as a moment of tension became a moment of solidarity. When communities encounter immigrants not as political abstractions, but as people, as families, as children, as fellow human beings, compassion becomes a possibility. But it needs to be said, compassion ultimately is a decision. Story after story in Holy Scriptures from multiple traditions tell of leaders who not only spoke about personal kindness, but also challenged unjust systems. The Jewish prophet Micah asks a question that still echoes today. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God? Justice requires structures that protect dignity. Fairness requires laws that reflect compassion. Public policy does not only shape laws, it shapes culture and community. Several pieces of legislation being considered in New York, in the New York State Legislature, seeks to move us closer to that vision. Some aim to ensure that people can access schools, courts, and houses of worship without fear of immigration enforcement. Others would guarantee legal representation from low-income immigrants facing deportation proceedings so that fairness and due process be something that is not only for the privileged, but for everyone. Still, other pieces of the legislation strengthen protection so immigrant families can access services and participate in community life without fear of intimidation or retaliation. And legislation like the New York for All Act seeks to ensure that immigrants can interact with schools, hospitals, community institutions, and public safety officers without fear that doing so could lead them to detention or deportation. None of these laws will pass automatically. They require voices. They require people willing to embody dignity, fairness, and righteousness. People of faith and the communities they are a part of have a particular role to play, not because we seek political power, but because we're living up to our shared ethical responsibility. Advocacy, rooted in faith, is not partisan. Advocacy rooted in faith is simply put faithfulness. It is what it is. May it be so. Amen.
What is motivating us, particularly at this time, with what is happening at the federal level and happening in our communities. The faith community is being called to action more often right now than at any other time, to really bear witness and to ensure that those in our community know and see that we are fighting and finding a better way. I did want to backtrack just a little bit before we head into our next segment where we do the training. And I wanted to thank some folks who made this day possible. One just left the room, so I want to wait until she comes back a little bit. But I did want to introduce and say a very special thank you to Reverend Jim Ketchum, who is our chair of our Criminal Justice Committee and also who is, again, the staff coordinator for the Chaplaincy Commission. And I also want to thank Easter and prosperous for today. But I just want to give them a big round of applause because dedication without recognition, sometimes day in and day out, is just immensely appreciated. So I want to in your packets, you're going to find this welcome page. On the back of it is a litany. And I'm going to do my best to chime in my Baptist voice here. And those who feel comfortable, please recite the litany with me as we go through this. I believe in Almighty God, who guided his people in exile and in exodus, the God of Joseph in Egypt and of Daniel in Babylon, the God of foreigners and immigrants. I believe in Jesus Christ, a displaced Galilean, who was born away from his people and his home, who fled his country with his parents when his life was in danger, and returning to his own country, suffered the oppression of the tyrant Pontius Pilate, the servant of a foreign power. He was persecuted, beaten, and finally tortured, accused and condemned to death unjustly. But on the third day, his born Jesus rose from the dead, not as a foreigner, but as for us citizenship in heaven. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the eternal immigrant from God's kingdom among us, who speaks all languages, lives in all countries, and reunites all races. I believe that the church is the spirit home for the foreigner and for all believers who constitute it, who speak the same language and have the same purpose. I believe that the communion of saints begins when we accept the diversity of the saints. I believe in the forgiveness of sin, which makes us all equal, and reconciliation, which identifies us more than some race, language, or nationality. I believe that in resurrection, God will unite us as one people, in which all are distinct and all are alive at the same time. Beyond this world, I believe in life eternal, in which no one will be an immigrant, but all will be citizens of God's kingdom, which will never end. Amen. Amen. I just want to say thank you to Heather, who you guys have in one way, shape, or form got to meet, and if you don't, you will be you will be being embarrassed for the notice. But thank you, Heather. So we have a little bit of a break before the next workshop begins. Around 3:45, so we're going to be coming back a little bit before 4 o'clock, probably around like 3:55 or so. But there's water downstairs, there are restrooms either side, and then we are going to resume with our training, what to do with ice concentrated liquor. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yep, same place, same location. We're just taking a little breather. We need to see the sun. The sun. Thank you. Folks online, I'm checking in with you. Are you able to hear everything okay?
Yes. Oh, good. For the installation? Oh, good. Ah, happy to hear that. Appreciate it. I appreciate it. It's going to be a good party. Yes. Thank you. Yes.
No hard feelings.
Yeah, I can do that. Yes.
We can put it on our website.
Absolutely. Yes. We'll do that. Yes, sir. Yes.
It gives a lot of material for the pastors to
Thank
draw.
you.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. We can do that. We can do that.
I'm the one
You
that
make
does
it work.
that.
Yeah, you make it work. Absolutely. Oh, a call. It's supposed to be written with a double L, but a call. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Yes, ma'am. I am going to be here for a while. That's all right. We're here to help. We're here to help. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good to be seen.
Oh, you did? Okay. But, you know, yes, you don't miss it. It's good to know you're there. He just agreed with Rashida. So we'll see it. Great. I can't wait.
I mean, I wouldn't be unless I had left it too much stuff.
Sí, que tampoco se puede depender. No, que como están las cosas en
Voy a tratar de hacer lo más que pueda hasta que no se pueda más. Sí, ha sido algo bastante fuerte, definitivamente. Ya hemos trabajado, yo he trabajado mucho, menos pensé que iba a ser tan. Sí, fue bien fuerte el proceso de separación, de la manera en que se está manejando. Creo que ha sido muy bueno para Next.
I get that. Yo te voy a preguntar, yo sé que va a estar su tiempo acá limitado.
Y yo me voy a mientras lo trabajo en Puerto Rico, allá te lo agradezco, porque ha sido fuerte. Ha sido sí, no, procesarlo y a la misma vez como que entenderlo, pero ya pasamos, ya habíamos, desde que ella me lo dijo fue a principios de abril, que porque ella se quería separar. En abril del año pasado, yo como que, ok, pues vamos a trabajar.
¿Qué pasa, negro? Good. I heard. Vaya.
Pero nada, un pasito a la vez.
I do. Absolutely. ¿Tú tienes mi teléfono?
Oh, sure.
Es que estoy pensando, en ellos somos y la primera vez conmigo. Para mí el tratado no perseguir
Fíjate, yo pensé que tenía tiempo. No, hay que querer.
No, yeah, there was on the forum, it's like
no sé, yo recuerdo que cada uno de nosotros los
what kind of church versus what the applicant is supporting. So, you know, I'd be willing to recommend and not just like that's a really big one. I was gonna say that it's the biggest year. And it's just like the one time I think they were giving out I'd be with you. And that'd be a joint experience.
No, I think at some point.
No.
Y que también
Asumía el rol de cada vez que viene oh, yeah. Santiago tiene algo, ahora es que te lo digo, ella no está reflecting, pero
Oh yeah, that's right.
Lots of people like that.
digo, y yo espero que al final del proceso puedan ver una
definitivamente nosotros de hecho todo lo posible son buena gente. No son unos bobos no, y ellos están súper bien. Pero así fue el proceso porque fíjate, yo creo que yo estoy yendo a terapia y gracias a Dios tengo muchas amistades. Yo creo que el proceso es a veces me siento preparado para el futuro y de repente pasa algo que de repente como que me ahogo con esos pensamientos porque no como un bobo celebrándote en todas las plataformas, en todo el espacio. Pensaba que yo hacía sacrificios para los dos, pero resulta que no necesariamente salvación. O sea,
y que es parte del proceso. No que estés buscando echar la culpa, pero parte del proceso es echar la culpa a los demás.
pues a veces estoy bien, pero ya no estoy bien. Y que estoy cerrando el
I never really predict like
¿A dónde va a quedar? una noche.
Down there with the
¿Qué tal? Pues, de 40 más.
Sí, por eso.
Let's do that. Let's do that. Yep.
the possibility of no harm. You might want to.
Yes, that's right, exactly.
Michelle, yes. So when I first came to New York, she was part of that conversation. And whenever boss, I do.
Oh no, I can't. Then I'm going to take my
We're Europeans, we're very proud.
Yep. Hour a month. Yeah, I thought so.
That's a piece of the,
JD was asking if you're going to go to lunch. I said, I think you can for a little bit. I don't think chapel. But you might tell your professor that you can ask it 50 minutes. Well, tell him your bishop is there.
presentation is meant to provide you all with information on how to build a protocol for your own congregation, as well as respond if you have an encounter with ICE at your congregation. Nothing in this presentation, including the presence of a law professor, at least from my side, should be construed as legal advice, or from his side, representation for anyone here in this room.
You will be tested, though.
Like a true professor.
Need to grade some.
And then I'll also just give some shout outs. So this training was compiled from a lot of different material, from National Employer Law Project, Human Service Council, the New York Lawyers for Public Interest. Diego compiled the first portion. We also have the Lawyers Alliance for New York and the New York State Attorney General's Office. So this original protocol was shared with us by the Attorney General's Office shortly after the election, the last presidential election, and was recommended as a resource, and then we adapted it into a training. CCSM, Columbia County Sanctuary Movement, organized collectively support empowerment. We've been doing a lot of trainings and webinars since this presidency, especially on Know Your Rights, rapid response, and identification of immigration agencies. Our rapid response work has really grown quite substantially. We've trained, I think, 11 different rapid response networks between Newburgh and North Country, and then a little bit into the tri-state pocket of Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York. And we are excited to share and see some of the folks in the room that run the Capital Region Sanctuary Coalition. It's a coalition that started with the asylum seekers being bussed up from New York City and the southern border, and then it shifted towards rapid response and is doing a lot of the rapid response in the upper Capital Region, being Albany County, Rensselaer County, Schenectady County, and Saratoga County. I think I saw Terry on video today as well, who's from Saratoga Immigration Coalition, which is a big partner within the coalition space. All right, so we're going to get into some law enforcement intervention protocol that's mostly focused on interaction with ICE. We will have a little section on I-9, so resources provided after this training. We'll give you more legal-oriented advice on I-9s from a few different institutions that have put together guides. We'll talk about how to exercise our rights, and y'all will also leave, I guess we'll follow up with a protocol that you can actually edit and fill in the names of different people from your congregation, so you have a draft policy to begin with. So the agenda will be protections and penalties, which I'll pass it to Diego for. We'll go over development of the protocol, and then the way that the last section is structured is it's combining the protocol and Know Your Rights to focus on what to do before, during, and after a raid, or hopefully an attempted raid, because you'll be successful in preventing it. All right, pass it off to Diego.
Right. So I don't work with CCSM. I work at Albany Law School. I am a criminal law professor, criminal procedure, and evidence professor. My experience is 17 years of trial work as a public defender / criminal defense attorney. So the reason this is important is because one of the things that's happening is encroachments on Fourth Amendment rights. And primarily what we're going to look into through my interaction will be understanding a little bit about the Fourth Amendment, but also other protections that may exist. I also will cover some of the general penalties and potential crimes. And the purpose of all of this is just to have a clear understanding. There are some slides that I'm just going to skip over because we don't need that level of detail, but we'll try to do as much as possible. It is a lot. There's no expectation to do a quiz afterwards, but it's just an understanding of what protections we, as individuals and also as places of worship, can rely on in order to mitigate the damage that's being currently done. So let's see what's happening. All right, so immigration enforcement comes from the federal government. The federal government that has been identified and there is a warrant out, a judicial warrant for their arrest, and they're serving that warrant, the place where they are at would not limit that enforcement action. Right? Obviously, the reason why we want to make sure, or at least these sensitive locations were identified, is because it had a chilling effect on the community. So basically, if you're monitoring protests, people will most likely than not think about going out to a protest, right? So recognizing the chilling impact that these activities had on these communities, the Biden administration presented this plan to stop enforcement actions within those locations. And of course, as soon as Trump came in, the same day, all of these protections were rescinded. One of the things that occurred was that once these protections were rescinded, again, this isn't law, this is just a policy decision from the executive of how to enforce or basically, teaching or letting the agency, giving them parameters. Once those parameters were lifted, one of the things and one of the first groups that were impacted by this were places of worship. And on a side note, places of worship have additional protections from the ones we'll discuss in detail through the Fourth Amendment. So places of worship are covered by the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. You may have heard of certain religious entities filing federal lawsuits, making the government not enforce these actions within the particular locations. Not only the church itself, or synagogue or mosque, but also through activities sponsored by these institutions. So if there was a wedding, they try to include those. Basically, ultimately, because we are exercising our freedom of religion, the Congress recognized that there must be certain protections in which the government, when they're trying to enforce any action, they must consider if this is absolutely necessary before going. You want me to speak up? No problem. I have no problem. I have no problem. So one of the things that we recognize is not just that the institution or the location is covered, but the activities. So if we have a food bank and we're distributing food throughout the community, that activity is also covered under this type of protection. So think about all the ways in which your particular institutions have different activities. I've heard of English as a second language activities. I've heard of driving people to and from church, but also to different locations, such it could be medical appointments, it could be school. Those activities are routinely covered within the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So keep that in mind when we are thinking of ways in which, as a congregation, we can continue to build on different activities in order to continue helping that migrant community that may be endangered within your location. But again, this is a remedy that's provided by statute. Recently, I think the Mormon Church filed one, and there were other churches, and they successfully impeded the federal government from exercising their this context. Now, what I'm going to go over does not mean that ICE follows this. We have seen how ICE blatantly and disregards not only the protections afforded, but multiple judge orders are daily being trampled upon. But that does not mean that we give up. It means that we learn more and we are more adamant about making those protections known when ICE shows up. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. So the key word there is unreasonable, right? We can go on. So what is it? Where does this Fourth Amendment protection come from? The right of people not to have the government search their persons, property, and other effects, right? There are two main things that go on. Number one is called the trespass doctrine, and the second one, which is the one you may have heard of at some point, the reasonable expectation of privacy test, right? So, I don't know what the next slide is. Let's check it out. Nope, let's go back. So, under the trespass doctrine, all we're doing is a recognition that if the government commits a trespass onto private property, the Fourth Amendment attaches, meaning that you may claim a violation if that occurs, right? So, the original case was decided in 1923, Alston versus U.S. It's basically, back then, the prohibition was around. They couldn't get this guy, so they set it up in a way they wiretap and listen into his phone calls and conversations. The Supreme Court refused to say that this was actually a Fourth Amendment issue because the microphone was never stuck onto the individual's property. It was just outside of his property. Because it didn't touch it, there was no trespass. If there would have been a trespass, then that would have been a different matter. But from that, we have that if you own property, there could be a trespass, right? And hence, protections do apply. And start thinking about that when you're looking at your congregation as property, right? Your items as property. The second protection level is called the reasonable expectation of privacy. Now, this was the 1950s, U.S. versus Katz versus U.S. And that's the first case that actually came up with a new way of how we can apply Fourth Amendment protections. This case was a guy in a telephone booth. Interesting enough, when I say telephone booth, this group understands. I was letting you know that I guess everyone saw Harry Potter here. But it's a very interesting reaction when I get when people say telephone. You get that? You do? So the guy went into the telephone booth and closed the door behind him, and then he called his bookie and made bets, right? The first one was alcohol, now we're talking about bets, right? So the FBI had been trying to get Mr. Katz, and they couldn't do it. So what did they do? In the booth, they placed a microphone on top of the booth, without touching the booth. And in that case, everyone says, well, he's probably going to lose because, of course, given the history of how the Fourth Amendment has been interpreted, he wouldn't have a protection. Surprisingly, the Supreme Court came up with a new test. It basically said the Fourth Amendment protects people, not property. That's the first thing. The second thing, did the individual think that he had a privacy within the context in which he was doing? So, review. He walked into a booth, close behind it, and started talking. He wasn't screaming, he wasn't doing anything that would suggest that he wanted everyone to know what he was doing. So the first part of the test is considering what he did. And in this case, the Supreme Court ruled in his favor. The second part of the test is, would society accept his privacy claim recognize the privacy protection that he claims to have. One example would be walking into the phone booth. I think everyone will understand that if he did everything right, I think everyone is willing to accept that he's not waiving any privacy. A different situation would be if, for some reason, you see someone pull out their cell phone, put it on speaker, and talk down the street, right? We as a society believe that that individual does not have the same privacy protection as in our first case, which would be the booth, right? So that's how the test works out. Now, that case, Katz versus United States, also recognizes that when we are out in public, there is a lower level of protection, right? So if anyone can see you, it's possible that the government can say, well, we all can see you too. So what you are exposing to the public will then have less protection. Okay, so those are the two ways in which we can start thinking of this. And I'll come back later with examples of how in our churches, in our places of worship, that could play out. Okay? And that's also part of the Know Your Rights training. Real quickly, the Fifth Amendment, which is probably the most famous amendment, thanks to law and order, you have a right to remain silent, everything you say, right? So, one thing that we need to be clear is that immigration law is not criminal law. But that does not mean that a person cannot request and claim their constitutional right to remain silent. So let's say ICE agents come in and I'm undocumented. They stop me and they say, where were you born? And I say, Dominican Republic. And then they say, how did you get here? I'm like, I took a plane. And then I say, and they ask, so did you get a visa? I'm like, nope, right? That interaction is the evidence they'll use against me at the immigration hearing. I have a choice to say, I choose not to speak. And that's protected under the Fifth Amendment because it's evidence that can be used against you and incriminate you. So, any individual facing law enforcement being asked questions that are meant to take information that's incriminatory, you can always say, and you have to say, I choose not to speak. Right? So that's the Fifth Amendment. We jump to the Sixth Amendment next, I think. Going back. No? Okay, so we're stopping here. Okay, just shifting gears, one of the things that was very problematic for people, or at least at the initial stage of this Trump 2.0 surge of immigration, was the exposure that we as citizens may have for doing the jobs that you guys are doing all the services that Amaury talked to you about when we saw that initial surge a couple years ago here in the capital region, all the efforts that you guys did. The question is that criminal in nature, right? So just going to review very briefly and explain briefly what are the potential exposures. And the primary one that the federal government uses to attack persons or criminalize people is under this particular section of the Immigration Code, and it just simply says harboring certain aliens. Now, if we look into it, there are subsections in there. So if we jump to the subsections, I can explain them. Okay, so that's that, right? So the thing is that big section is broken down into these different categories, right? So the first one is bringing or attempting to bring an alien. I'm from Puerto Rico. This is what I have in Puerto Rico. We have a lot of migration coming from the Dominican Republic. These are famous jodas, which are small boats, roughly 50 feet long. And we have had migration patterns, legal and illegal patterns, for centuries. Recently, it has become a pickup service or dropping off service, right? That's not enough. Transporting or moving means that you are intentionally moving an individual that does not have legal status for the purposes of avoiding detection by the federal government. That's when this kicks in. Concealing, harboring, or shielding. All right, I'm not sure if you guys know about this individual. A couple years ago, he was prosecuted under this section for leaving all over the Arizona desert a bunch of water and food snacks, basically preparing the field in order to ensure that migrants who would come over would not die in the desert. So the federal government did what the federal government do. They prosecuted him. That's the purpose here is, again, you're trying to do stuff to avoid detention. The leading case is if you are moving an individual, providing them shelter, and you're part of a network. Think about the underground network, right? That was criminalized back then. That's what we have.
How much time did it do?
He was found not guilty. The jury said, nah. The first jury was actually deadlocked, so they had to declare a mistrial, and they started again. And the second jury trial took them 22 minutes to say not guilty. They just couldn't believe that the government would have prosecuted someone for this. And it happens all over the place, yes.
So you mentioned transporting, but not in service of like some religious program that you have. What's to keep one from saying part of our religious programming is helping people get to work?
That's great.
Okay. So does
No, so is it for the purposes of avoiding ICE?
Thank you.
You have a right to remain silent.
This is hypothetical.
And again, hypothetically, you still have that right. When you started off saying it's work-related, it is work-related, right? And that is a service that your congregation offers and does. Keep doing it. It's the federal government that needs to show that you are doing this for the purposes of treating this individual so that they can find it. It's going to be hard, but it's going to be easy if we say, well, I'm going to waive my Fifth Amendment right and I'm going to do something else, right?
I can answer this real quick. In 2019, I was pulled over by ICE in Hudson, New York. I was driving two of our community members from criminal court to their attorney's office. And we practiced all of our rights. We refused to let them in the vehicle because they didn't have a judicial warrant. We activated our rapid response network and they ended up leaving. So they threatened me with harboring and transporting illegal aliens because they thought it would intimidate me into opening my car door so that they could take the people. Obviously, they were unsuccessful, and they later tried to tell other branches of the federal government that I was doing the same thing, but they haven't charged me with anything, and that's because this is my assessment of it, I was just bringing them from a public place with other law enforcement present to go to their court hearing. They were sitting in normal seats in my car with their seatbelts on, so it wasn't like I was trying to conceal them, which is one of the indicators here.
It's all about context, ultimately. Now, I want to caveat what Brian was saying. That was 2019. They're going to break that window and grab you and everyone else in today. So, but just keep that in mind. The purpose of the example was to understand the crime, right? Not to, just to be clear. Okay? Encourage. You can see that a lot through faith and services, right? These are services online that are basically scams, and they encourage people, third world countries, to come, and then they put them on basically slavery trafficking, in which they can't get out. Human trafficking and sort of. So that's one of the main reasons why this encouragement is in there. So those are primarily most of the crimes that you see. Oh, and conspiracy, which means two or more people get together to talk about doing this type of criminal activity. responsible for one part, so the prosecutor can charge you with conspiracy and or aiding and abetting. I'm going to skip this part. Other potential federal crimes, which are actually the ones that we have seen more aggressively filing recently in federal court. This includes obstruction of justice. I don't know if you heard of the guy in D.C. who threw a sandwich at officers. Obstruction of justice. Found not guilty. Right? There are many other instances in which, specifically in the D.C. area, in which they have charged individuals with obstruction. That doesn't mean they're going to get a conviction. But in order to obstruct, there must be an intentionally impede the legal actions of an immigration officer. One of the problems that they're having is that they're not identifying themselves as immigration officers. Right? But that is one of the most common. Another important crime, and this I'm focusing on the immigrant, is lying to a federal officer, primarily. Or to us. Like, right? You cannot lie. You can say, I choose not to answer that question. Before you say, no, I didn't post that on Facebook. No, it wasn't my face and nor my account. Now, when you get interviewed by a federal law enforcement, they have everything already. They're just there to put the cherry on top. Okay? And if you lie, they get a bonus. Identity theft. Again, this is mostly for migrants. The use of a fake ID will cost them automatically $2. All right, so we'll skip the Q&A for now, and then we can jump in straight to the building of the protocol, and then we'll get together at the end and we can discuss everything that, and the quiz, expect the quiz. Sure, but you want me to talk more? Sure, whatever. You have a question? How do you do what? That's your part. Any questions? Yes.
When you talk about buildings, houses of worship, are parking lots considered our property as houses of worship?
Yes. So anything that you guys own, right, includes those accessories, right? Now, there's two things going on at the same time. For some reason, I thought that there were slides that with search for, and that's at the end, right? Okay, so you'll see later on how these enforcement actions can be properly done, which is through the use of a judicial warrant, which is different from an agency warrant. And Brian will talk a little bit about that. But you've seen that trespass doctrine under the Fourth Amendment. Everyone that has authority over a building can request people to get out. We've seen it in gas stations. No shirt, no service, right? So no ice, no service, right? We can do signage, we can do other stuff, and it will be covered in our next section. Yes.
Programs like PSL classes, welcoming new Americans, those kind of programs are very specific to the house of worship have. Is it recommended that we now not say that and then we can move on, or because that might attract ICE or anything like that?
I don't think the Facebook so the question is, how can we protect ourselves when we see an immigration raid happen, right? We're talking about we're out in the street and we see ICE agents show up and you decide to just observe or report. Under the First Amendment, you can do that. No officer or law enforcement person or government agent can tell you that you cannot report. That is false. Second of all, you guys are in public property. So yes, you can still report. That's no problem. What you cannot do is obstruct the arrest in any way, shape, or form. And that has been a very context-driven issue. We have seen how the administration throws out anytime something happens as that they were impeding the arrest. In theory, what happened is that the officers began beating someone up here and they ended up there and took everyone out and then arrested people that were there. What's happening is that observers are being arrested, detained, and then released without charges. That's what's happening the most. And unfortunately, we have an agency that has a very, 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 very low amount of training when it comes to constitution. So the issue primarily becomes one of training versus rights. I know there was a question here, and that's it.
So my first fact is one of the
Sir. Nope. Nope. You need to know. They need to show that you knew that this individual had a warrant out and they were looking for him. That's a different scenario from, and I go back to the underground railroad, right? If you're moving people because you know they're being searched, then that's a different monster.
In the presentation, you mentioned ancillary services.
So that includes ESL, and includes taking food, that includes driving people around.
So if a congregation has specified services that they have decided that they can provide to their congregation and to their neighborhood, that can be distributed to immigrants.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
And how can that service or that context be protected from the obstruction of justice by
ICE agents. Okay, so let's say that we are delivering food. We're delivering food. You have no migrants in your vehicle. But when you go to someone's house, when they come out, ICE agent jumps them, right? And then you tackle an ICE agent. Who hasn't thought of doing that? Right? That's obstruction.
that's their obstruction.
No. If you decide to tackle the ICE agent to keep your congregation member, who is also an immigrant that is being targeted, and you tackle the agent, that is obstruction and probably assault on law enforcement.
Is it their obstruction of justice if they interfere in the delivery of the food to the immigrant?
It could be, but they're not going to wait for that.
But the whole thing about it is if you're going to attack,
Yes, you're right.
And now, this is what he's trying to tell them, because you can't take a chance like that until they get it right on how to treat people.
we're talking about white supremacists who don't give a crap.
Yes, absolutely. What I would suggest is this. What I can say is this. If you were to be prosecuted for obstruction of justice because you're delivering food or for harboring or for anything under that statute, your activity is a protected activity under law.
Can you sue them for interfering?
Absolutely, you can sue, you lose. You will lose because there are very strict restrictions on how to sue the federal government. The way the structure is set up, you need to have permission from the government to sue them. And permission, yes, it's called sovereign immunity. And in most cases, the government sets up the ways in which you can sue government agents. So in order to sue, the actions that they did must be under those remedies. And unfortunately,
Do you know about the Ninth Amendment of the Constitution?
I know some of the Ninth Amendment.
Could that be used against these individuals?
I can say this. There are many other smarter people than me that deal with that. I can deal with the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, and the other amendments. Yes. I'm sorry, over here.
We have a soup kitchen at our church, and they usually wait on the lawn before the soup kitchen opens. We have a lot of immigrants that come to that soup kitchen. If they are waiting on the lawn, then they are protected, but, if they were on the sidewalk, would they not be, or?
No, I mean, it's an issue of, can the officers see them?
Yes.
Okay, so when they approach them, are they going to run? Because if they run, it doesn't matter where they run,
Okay.
law enforcement will chase them down because they can't. That's under a doctrine called hot pursuit. If they stay there, is their arrest illegal? Well, it was a violation of your property right, trespass, but it wasn't their home.
Oh,
So because of the fact that you invited them into your property, they weren't necessarily in either. They were out in public and everyone can see them. So it's not going to help them that much. There's just real quick.
Could I just ask you to repeat the question?
Yes, I will.
Afterwards, so the folks
Sorry about
online
that.
can hear. No problem.
I know there was someone here, there's one in the back, and then over there. So 1, 2, 3. Okay?
You mentioned Facebook. But one of the things my congregation does is there's an individual delicate status, shall we say, and we do not discuss what the latest news is about his attempt to protect himself, or what we're doing to help him. That's not a general conversation.
There is no fight club.
There's no
Fight club.
right.
The first rule about fight clubs, you don't talk about fight clubs.
In the back.
Well, I just had a general question. When I listen to this, I hear that a lot of the ICE enforcement actually seems to be violating the First Amendment in terms of the ability for churches to exercise, their faith, for faith institutions to exercise. So my issue is the church is kind of skirting, to me, it seems like it's skirting around the larger issue, which is why is it not being questioned that ICE is actually infringing upon the First Amendment of churches to worship institutions, faith institutions, to actually complete their mission. So hiding people who are trying to seek, food, get basic services. If your mission is to give, sustenance to people, then how is the federal government not infringing upon the right of churches to exercise their?
So, yes, the answer is yes. And the question or the comment was the frustration between the protected right to religious liberty and the exercise of that religious liberty with the obvious encroachment by ICE enforcement actions, right? And that friction, we can talk about the ancillary services and ways in which we can protect ourselves, but what about the main issue, which is that infringement of that liberty interest and how you decide to pray and come together as a congregation. The Religious Freedom and Restoration Act gives you that avenue in which you can get an attorney, file an injunction, and force the federal government to say and follow that they will not use enforcement actions within those locations and activities. But unfortunately, we don't have class actions for that. We need to have multiple lawsuits that come together. Yes.
delivering food and the immigrant opens their door, that is an invitation for an ICE agent to come in?
No. It's an invitation for the person delivering the food. But that doesn't mean the ICE agent will not push it in and make them force themselves in. That's what's happening. And it's wrong. And it's a violation of constitutional rights. Unfortunately, under immigration law, the violation must be extreme. But that doesn't mean that we don't get to help in those instances.
So if you are delivering food and an ICE agent comes up and you just stand in front of the door while the immigrant closes it, is that obstruction?
No. All right, there are many more scenarios that we can think of, and maybe after we get the protocol training, we can answer a lot of those questions through this second part. But yeah, I'll be around. Just wave me down and we'll be here. Thank you.
All right, y'all, we have a ton of content to get through, so I'm gonna go as quick as possible, and we'll take questions in designated.
Can you move, if you're not using that, can you move so we can see this?
Oh, yeah.
I will say there is one question online
want to be relying on to have a conversation with an ICE agent. On the other hand, if somebody can stay calm, cool, and collected, and maybe has some de-escalation skills, they could be a good person to put point on that. In addition, you might want to consider where people are located, which we'll talk a little bit more about. For example, in a restaurant, the hostess might be the person that interacts with ICE first. Your administrative staff, if somebody's preaching here, might interact with an agent at the front door first. Who's going to compile documents? Who has your immigration or other attorney's contact information? And who's authorized to talk to media, for example, if media inquires about the raid that just happened, or you want to proactively talk about the enforcement activity, and then also who's going to lead post-raid response. So we've come up with a little matrix here, and this is to be able to identify the role, the responsibility, a primary person, and a backup person. We talked a little bit about most of these already. One of them that we didn't mention, we'll dig into how to do this position more as witnesses who are recording the encounter. And you'll have access to this chart so you can make your own based on who is in your congregation, who's on your staff, etc. Another one specific to congregations in this way is who is communicating with your congregation. One of the things you should consider here, again coming back to skills, are what language skills are necessary. If you have a congregation that's diverse and has multiple languages, then you might have multiple people in a position like congregation communication to make sure that everybody is being communicated with equally throughout a process like this, because one of the roles is to make sure that they remain calm and they know what the plan is as well, so that needs to be communicated. Similarly, in a restaurant situation, for example, you're going to have somebody at the front of the house talking with an agent perhaps, somebody's got to be in the back of the house talking with the kitchen staff so they know what's going on out there and what they need to do in order to keep everybody as safe as possible. Alright, so in creating your plan, as I mentioned, we talk about these roles and responsibilities. I also alluded to the location of different staff, and that could either be a normal location or a new location based on how you all prepare yourselves for this, right? So if you don't have an administrative staff that's generally by the front door of your congregation during service, you might want to put somebody there. Either it doesn't have to be administrative staff, it could be somebody from your congregation who you specifically trained or needs some of those skills that I mentioned so that they are prepared and ready in case somebody comes in. It might not always be an ICE agent, it could be an agitator, it could be a civilian trying to do harm. So again, think about who could be prepared in your congregation to do something like that. You're also going to want to have an agreed upon communication channel so that everybody can be receiving information. What CCSM uses is Signal Chat. Signal is an encrypted messaging service, and in this case where you're talking about a work environment, the recommendation is that you have all the staff of your workplace on that Signal Chat. Depending on how big your congregation is, how well you all know each other, etc., you might consider having a congregation Signal Chat specifically for communicating in emergency situations. I would say that that latter part is important. If you're going to start a chat of your congregation, you want to be very specific on what that chat is going to be used for. So our rapid response network, for example, has multiple different chats based on the role that you're in within that network. The same for our organization based on teams, like service team versus organizing team, for example. But we also have a full team Signal Chat, and we have one with our governing body and our staff included. So this could, runs to a private area in your church, then and an agent sees that, they're going to follow them into that area. They're less likely to do so if everybody is remaining calm and walking at a nice even pace to get to that private area. And that can offer some protection, both because it's a private space and because anytime you can put a physical thing between you and them, like a door, regardless of if they get through it or not, or if they violate your rights, it's going to delay. And delay is a key principle here, especially when it comes to rapid response. So again, on communications, y'all might have specific roles as staff at your congregations or pastors, ministers, etc. And so it's important to decide prior to an action like this about who is going to be communicating with the media. If the media is inquiring about what happened, what are you all willing to share? You should even talk about not only the spokesperson, but what are you going to share? So for example, CCSM, with our Rapid Response Network, we get inquiries all the time. I cannot tell you how many journalists have asked me, what's their name? What's their date of birth? How many kids do they have? They as somebody who was in photojournalism for a long time, I understand the intention, and what they're trying to do is try to paint somebody as a more humane person, or rather write about the humanity of a person, right? And a lot of times they think about that in the good immigrant, bad immigrant narrative, and so one of the first questions they always ask is like, did they commit a crime? So the reason I'm sharing this is because what we've done is we share general information. So we unfortunately had a large-scale raid for us last week, where they detained 4 people in Hudson, and the information that was shared was, it was 4 individuals. They were construction workers on their way to a roofing site. They're Latin American males. We've confirmed that they are invitations. So it's like very aggregate information, nobody's name, nobody's address, no identifying information. I'm not going to talk about their criminal record. We're not going to talk about their immigration case. With that being said, if you all have specific cases and the individual has consented to sharing that information publicly, and it's advantageous of you in a campaign to free somebody, then you might share a lot more information. And that's one of the things we're including. So we launched a family preparedness plan in the first administration. We've now done a second iteration of family preparedness planning, but we've also done a new workshop called individual safety planning. And this is because of the switch from us always focusing on preparing directly impacted people to now have to focus on what if we get taken for videotaping that, right? And so one of the things we included those plans is we want you to tell your own story, but you can't do that detained sometimes, or it's more difficult. So pick which photo that you love. What photo do you want there to be out there about you? What do you want to say about yourself? You want to say that you're a loving, caring mother, that you've been a leader in your community, XYZ, you graduated from here, you attend church there. So think about your own narratives as well, so that those things are prepared in supporting these plans and media work. So this plan should be accessible and available, and it should be practiced. Think about it like a fire drill. So what we tend to do is we have our protocol. We actually have a copy of the comparison of judicial and administrative warrant and our protocol right next to the interior of the office door. I can tell you, as somebody who's been pulled over by ICE multiple times, it is not easy to remember Know Your Rights, and it's not easy to remember the plans, especially when they're extensive plans. And so having reminders for people like those Know Your Rights red cards, for example, those are extremely helpful. Having your plan accessible to people is extremely helpful. All of the numbers that are needed to call, and just preparing them for being in a high energy crisis moment. Those materials especially vulnerable folks, but depending on what role you have or what you're doing with your congregation, you might also want to consider having a family preparedness plan or an individual safety plan. Usually that includes emergency contact information as well.
Who's gonna take care of the kids?
Yeah, that's what's in the family preparedness plan, right? Like not only who's gonna take care of them, who did you authorize with the school to pick them up? Do they have medication that they need to take? Who's gonna take care of your pets? Do you have a lease at your house or your apartment? All these things that people don't necessarily know about each other or their families. It's a way to compile all those documents so that you can take actionable, or those decisions are made prior to when you need to take action on them, and they're thoughtful decisions, right? So a lot of times in our emergency, our family preparedness plans, our individual safety plans, we have power of attorneys, for example. It's extremely difficult to make that decision the day of. So we generally, day of, like even just day of completing that packet. So usually what we do is we'll do a webinar where people get a glimpse of everything that they're gonna have to make decisions on. Then they get a chance to go home and talk to their family members, and then an attorney can work with them on the paperwork. Obviously there's emergency situations. We've had to do this with ICE check-ins up here in Malta. High likelihood that somebody might get detained. We're gonna put together a family preparedness plan now.
I just wanted to mention that it's rather complex, and Capital Region Sanctuary Coalition, so it's CCSM, has training on this, and we're working on training the trainer so that we can get that out to congregations and others.
Thank you for that work. All right, so defining post-grade services. This is an important part about congregation members knowing that you're going to have their back. And again, for you all to make these decisions prior to having it in front of you. So an example is your congregation, if they're a staff or make sure that this plan actually gets created and gets put in place. So another thing about training, again, similar to a fire drill, and this is both for entrance and egress, but also for places that you might want to put the signs, is does everybody have an understanding of a map of their actual building? Do people know where the fire exit is, and equally do they know where the most probable entry point is for an immigration agent? Generally, it's going to be the front door. But y'all should know, like, oh, actually, the door in the back eastern corner of the building is always unlocked. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, but y'all should know what it is. And then also think about who has access to those doors and what the locking mechanism is, because similar to a fire, a lock could be a protection, but it could also be a danger. If not everybody has key to that door, and there's a fire and everybody needs to get out that door, then you've created a worse emergency situation. So like what we have at our office is one of those locks with the bars that engages, so when the door closes it automatically locks, but from the inside we can just push it open. So they have like digital entry locks like that too, they just automatically lock behind you, so think about what your lock scenarios are as well to make sure that you're not creating an unintentional hazard. Went over the exits and entrances. Yeah, how do you know who's outside of your place of worship is a really good one too. So, like Diego was mentioning, if you hear a knock on the door and then you open the door, ICE is most likely just going to barge right in. It doesn't mean that you actually gave them permission, but they're going to take it and they're going to use it. So consider having some type of system to be able to identify who's on the other side of the door. It could be as simple as a people. You could have a camera system or an intercom. What we would say about cameras is I'm not going to make like a specific recommendation on a brand, but generally you should be looking into more closed network cameras and the privacy policy of the providers. For example, Ring is a no-go. You should not have a Ring camera on the front of your church because ICE uses that data. And other law enforcement agencies do as well. I don't know if you saw the Super Bowl commercial, but they're trying to create one of the most extensive networks of self-surveillance. And the way that they're selling it to us is none other than puppies. Right? So this Ring commercial was, we've added AI to our Ring camera so that we can find lost puppies. Right? I know, so yeah, just make sure you're using a secure camera that, like, cloud storage is insecure unless you know that the policy of the provider is secure. If you need tech support on that, I'd advise that you talk to the tech company. And yeah, those are some of the things for knowing what's outside of your congregation. Go ahead.
You mentioned the private space. 20 years ago, we were told to have all windows in our doors so that we were behaving properly. And should that private space not have a window in the door?
When you say private space, like...
Well, you were asking for a private space.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One is you could identify a space that you want to make private that's strategic for your actual plan. I was talking about just specific spaces that are already private. Like if your congregation isn't walking into it, like the sanctuary, you know, like your admin spaces, etc. Those are private spaces. That's where you should be putting those. If it is intended to be, and this is what I think you're asking, if it's intended to used in Minneapolis with New York State license plates. So we're not, based on the information that we have from our rapid response networks, we're not seeing so much interregional travel. Like the license plates that we have documented in Albany, we're not also seeing those license plates in Newburgh, with very few exceptions. So regions are kind of focused from where their headquarters are. In this case, the Malta office and the FBI building for Albany. But yeah, so the ways that we are able to identify, again, they also have tinted windows, and one of the best ways to identify them is getting close to them. So you see this little speck right here. These are actually very small lights that are put in the grill of the vehicle, and then up here by the visor of the car on the interior, they'll also have lights. So there's, again, the raid that we had in Hudson, there was one successful and one attempted raid. And the folks in the attempted raid were like, yeah, we remember everything that CCSM was saying. It looked like a suspicious vehicle, so we got on the phone. Then they put their lights on, and we were like, those aren't normal lights. Those are coming out of their grill and their windshield, so they knew it was ICE. They were actually able to prevent them from entering. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the third section. All right. Any questions about this first section on developing a protocol as well as identifying agents? So we got two in the back here.
Just I'm further down in the Poughkeepsie, Newburgh area, and our rapid response networks are reporting that they are subcontracting with regular commercial vans and vehicles for like private electricians and plumbers and things like that. They're using those vehicles in off-duty hours to disguise themselves and infiltrate neighborhoods.
That's wild. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing. I mean, I'm not surprised by it. Would you like to repeat it louder, or would you like me to repeat it?
Go for it.
So they were saying that in their area, like Poughkeepsie and Newburgh, that ICE is actually allegedly subcontracting private companies and then using vehicles from like plumbers and electricians so that they can move through neighborhoods in more disguise. The military does this all the time, even on the interior. They use a lot of like budget trucks and things like that to move people around in cities when they're trying to be undercover. For us, we've I think pretty much only seen unmarked vehicles at this point. There was another question.
And so at times we use a off-duty police officer. Are they responsible to our process, or do they have something that they can say, even as an off-duty officer, I have to abide by this, and this?
I'll share what I know, and then if you have anything else. Because of how severe everything is becoming, CCSM has created an internal safety team. As one of the coordinators of our internal safety team, I am also trying to gain more experience in traditional safety and security. So